谢谢大家回谢北的时间，我是大叔萨。
我是大叔甲。
我们这一次继续一个台湾应该是我们是唯一有办法做这么有趣的事情。我们这一次继续讨论乌克兰，然后我们特别是因为种种原因，乌克兰的朋友，我们找到一位 Sergey Danilov。他是在这个年初大打起来之前，他其实一直是在东乌克兰，他比较是一个所谓的 community organizer， 他是做一些这个中东穆斯兰教的一些 issue。那所以在这段期间，因为应该说过去10年来，他也慢慢的变成是这个当地人信任的一位教授，一位老师。所以最近这个乌克兰打成这样子，俄国是打东边嘛，所以乌克兰东边，所以东边的很多资讯，他其实就变成他人还在那个基辅，可是他就是很多相关资讯就是被占领区的状况，所以我们真的非常感谢他上我们节目跟我们分享这大概是2礼拜前在占领区的状况。那当然Sergey 他自己他英文不是很好，所以也很感谢我们另外一位朋友 Oksana。他其实是想当年在这个交大念过，他中文其实还不错。不过就是讲的还是没有那么顺，所以就麻烦这个 Sergey 讲乌克兰文，然后 Oksana 再翻译成英文这样子。那这一集因为有好几个语言，所以会比较长一点，不过很值得听，因为有很多这个新闻上没有报道的细节。那我们也想说借这个机会原汁原味的跟我们的听众分享。那大叔讲你觉得呢？
是啊，就是延续上次，就是我们做这2集的背后的一个想法是说，我们不是传统的这个搞所谓的平衡报道了，我们就是纯粹从一个见证跟记录的角度去跟这些人聊他们所见所闻这样子。那因为也是像刚刚大叔长讲的，就是说可能会比较长的时间，希望大家有一点点耐心。然后因为是战地嘛，所以可能这个 Internet 的这个画质可能不一定会特别好，但是还是请大家能够用心去听，应该会有不少的有趣，然后一些所谓的 insight， 大家可以想一想这样子。好，那我们现在就直接进入节目。
We are so lucky today to invite Sergey and Oksana to our program and to talk about the occupied territory in Ukraine today. So I'd like to first introduce Sergey. Would you please say hi to our listener, please?
Hi.
Yes, and then
nice
of course,
to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. And then of course, Oksana, an old friend. Hello.
Hi. Hi.
And for people who may feel Oksana sounds familiar, if you remember the Chit-Chat News, the person who demonstrated how to say Slava or Ukraini is Oksana. Ukraini, sorry. Kind of close. So let's go ahead and start it with the program. I believe Dashuja, you will have the first story.
Sure. Well, oftentimes when we think about, at least when I think about occupied territory, I come up with this, perception like, oh, I will be cut off from the rest of the world. So my question to you, Sergey, is that how do you connect with the outside world, and how do you get stories, and and to the extent you get stories, how do you make sure they're real? So what do you do day to day in terms of getting information from the outside?
Yeah. Найбільше отримується інформації від моїх друзів, колег і партнерів, з якими я працював на Херсонщині 8 років. Тобто Україна унікальна держава. У нас дуже розвинений інтернет, у нас дуже розвинені соціальні мережі. у нас проникнення інтернету і якість інтернету дуже висока. Одна з найкращих в світі і один з найдешевших інтернетів в світі. І ця специфіка, що українці дуже багато користуються соціальними мережами. Після того, як почалася окупація, частина моїх друзів змушена була виїхати, а частина зараз переховується. Але завдяки моїй активній позиції в Фейсбуці, і в медіа, і в соціальних мережах, дуже багато людей нових, з якими я не був знайомий, звертаються і розповідають мені свої історії в приватних повідомленнях. Соціальні мережі вони не можуть контролювати. Окупанти, росіяни не можуть контролювати зараз соціальні мережі і інтернет на Херсонщині. І це є головним каналом передачі інформації. Люди і інфраструктура.
Просто щоб уточнити, ви зараз не в Херсоні, правильно?
Так, я в Києві.
Ви в Києві.
В день окупації я мав бути в Херсоні. І там тільки збіг обставин. Я не зміг взяти квитки вчасно і не зміг поїхати. Так би опинився 24-го саме в Херсоні. Ми мали відкривати виставку, присвячену Криму в Херсоні. І я мав виступати там на конференції в Херсоні.
Добре, я перекладу. Okay. So I will translate. Sergei, he was working in Kherson region for last 8 years with local communities, primarily involving projects building up the local communities. So he actually has a lot of very strong connections within the region. And in Ukraine, it has a good internet everywhere. It's very, very cheap, accessible. So best the spread of the internet connection and the spread of social media as well. That is why all of this communication that is going on with occupied territories is going on through the internet and through the social media. Because the people, the occupiers, Russians, they cannot block and control the social media channels. So mostly the people that Sergei knows in the region, most of them actually have left and went to Ukraine. The actual non-occupied Ukraine, obviously all of it is Ukraine. Some of them are hiding, but also because of how much he writes about the stories from his friends on the social media. Basically, that's how I started following his channel, because he writes so much about the life in the occupied territories. Many people started contacting him in private messages and sharing their stories now.
I see.
So to make it clear, Sergei is not in the occupied territories himself. He was actually supposed to be on the day of the occupation. He had a ticket to go back. They were supposed to open event that dedicated to Crimea on 24th of February. But, well, that obviously didn't happen, and he is in Kyiv right now.
Okay,
right.
Understood.
Right. So what, based on everything you know, what is the daily life like, for example, food and medicines, for the civilians? What's going on?
Ситуація дуже важка. Вона різна по області. Є населені пункти, є села, які закриті, повністю закриті окупантами. Там ситуація може доходити до голоду і гуманітарної катастрофи. Особливо це стосується сіл на правому березі Дніпра, в Херсонщині, там, де розташовані військові частини. Вони бояться, що мешканці будуть передавати інформацію про їх розташування українській армії. Була дуже важка ситуація по всій області з продуктами харчування. Зараз стало трішки краще в Херсоні, тому що дозволили продавати продукції місцевих фермерів. В Херсонщині дуже багато виробляється городини, овочів, і от дозволили приїжджати в Херсон торгувати. А також почали поступати продукти з Росії через Крим. Треба сказати, що всі торгівельні великі мережі, які забезпечували продуктами харчування Херсонщину, вони закриті, логістика обвалилася. Окупанти не хочуть, не вміють і спеціально створювали умови для кризи, продовольчої кризи, для того, щоб використовувати це як важель впливу і важель підкорення території. Ви не будете нічого їсти, якщо не будете купувати російське. А для того, щоб купувати російське, ви будете отримувати в нас дозвіл, підприємці, їздити в Крим, купувати продукти. Ще гірша ситуація з ліками. Тут катастрофа була. Ми, друзі, організовували волонтерські центри, де виясняли запаси, у кого є критично важливі ліки для хронічно хворих. І для того, щоб створювати банк обміну. Ліки теж логістика постачання ліків обвалилася. Скільки було запасів в аптечній мережі, їх намагалися зберегти і якось розподілити медичні заклади. Одночасно велику частину аптек і складів ліків було розграбовано окупантами, які потім почали продавати ці ліки за високими цінами, спекулюючи на тому, що є хворі, яким ліки потрібні постійно. Зараз Херсон нагадує Херсон 90-х років, тобто 30 років тому. Немає супермаркетів, ти мусиш іти шукати кожен продукт окремо. Люди продають якісь товари на вулиці. Це не організована торгівля, в якій ти хочеш купити одне і йдеш шукаєш. І це все супроводжується дуже похмурою атмосферою, тому що ти не знаєш, чи повернешся додому. Тебе постійно можуть перевірити документи і забрати. Всі намагаються менше говорити, менше дивитися навколо, проявляти якісь свої емоції. Атмосфера дуже гнітюча, тиха і залякана. Сано?
Thank you.
Давайте ми будемо розбивати трохи, тому що я сподіваюся, що я нічого не забуду, але я можу щось забути.
Окей, я буду коротше робити, добре.
Okay. So, yeah, I'll try to translate the whole thing. So the situation is quite difficult in terms of daily life. It depends on the place that we're talking about. It really depends on where it is. But some of the smaller villages on the right side of the Dnipro River, for example, could be completely blocked by the Russians. They don't have any food, and it's a level of humanitarian catastrophe. The reason for that is because on the right side of the river, there are military, they're standing the military, how do you say, troops of the Russians. And
checkpoints.
Essentially, they are scared that the local people will tell the Ukrainian military where they are located. So they're kind of trying to oppress them more to make sure that doesn't happen. Then it used to be quite a bad situation in food in general in the region, because mostly also it was winter, so there was no local produce. But actually that part of Ukraine, the south, is very prolific in terms of food.
Food production.
So now like new vegetables started growing in spring, and the local produce started covering the needs of the food quite a bit, and the farmers got permission to sell it, which is also important. Also, products like all of the other food that is not grown locally is being shipped from Crimea. All the supermarkets and all the logistics that used to be in place is closed and is not working at all. So essentially, they have a kind of situation where the food crisis is created. So the people and businessmen, they have no choice, but actually to buy the food from Russia. By the special permission that have to get, so they have to kind of to collaborate with local government in a way legitimizing the local government. So it's a strategy for the occupiers to establish their power over the territory. The products are going through the Crimea, so I guess they're going through the bridge to Crimea and to the south of Ukraine. So in terms of medications, is also very bad. They're not really getting any from the outside. So at the beginning of the invasion, there were organized coordination, like just self-organized coordination centers to collect the medicines that are left in the pharmacies and storages and distribute it between medical institutions and the people who actually need it most. So all of it, I have to say that's a big important part that it's not usual thing that we know. In Ukraine, a lot of things are self-organized, and we call people who do that self-organization because of volunteers. So in Ukraine, there are like two kinds of volunteers. Like normal word in English would be volunteers, that is military and that goes to fight. So we have that, and we have a different word for that. But in Ukrainian, whenever we say volunteers, and usually have a lot of misunderstanding in that in English, either people who actually try to handle some aspect of support of local people, for example, or support of military, and they're not getting paid for it, and usually, and it's just a self-organization kind of effort.
Sure.
And actually, I have to say that because the war actually started 8 years ago, those volunteers became like very, very important part of life, and everyone just keeps saying volunteers, but that's what they do. And those volunteer organizations actually can become pretty big. And I but I just wanted to put it as a side note.
Thank you.
So yeah, volunteers were trying to find all the medicines that are left in the region and distribute them as efficiently as possible. Some of the medicines were actually stolen by the occupiers and then being sold at very, very high prices. So in general, the situation in Kharkiv is similar to... Oh, sorry.
Kherson.
Yes, Kherson, my bad, sorry. In similar situation in Kherson, Kharkiv is in Ukrainian is not occupied. Sorry. So the situation in Kherson is very much like a situation that used to be in 90s, right after the USSR has collapsed. And at that time, there was no supermarkets. There was, because business really didn't exist in Soviet Union, suddenly everything became very chaotic. People were selling things maybe in the streets if they had something to sell. And you were just going, and trying to find things because nothing was really available. So basically people are leaving the house during the daytime and just hoping that they will find what they need, but never quite sure they would. Also, usually people don't really, don't make noise, don't play music, don't express emotion, don't laugh. Everyone is kind of in a little bit...
like a frozen state.
Like somber attitude, because there is atmosphere of fear, because you can be stopped in the street, they can take your documents, and there is a chance that you might not come back home. So the situation is quite fearful.
Sure.
Right. And then, so on that point, I think I will be interested in what do people do as an activist? What happens to them? I mean, what do they do?
Так, з перших днів, коли зайшли русські в Херсон, вони почали полювання за активістами. Перше, що вони почали робити. Причому це можуть бути зовсім різні активісти, так як ті, які підтримували українську ідентичність, чи працювали в міжнародних проєктах, чи були журналістами, так і люди, які займалися захистом тварин, наприклад, або просто були. Єдине, що треба сказати, коли росіяни зайшли, вони мали дуже мало інформації про херсонських активістів. Оскільки колаборантів мало, вони орієнтувалися на якісь дуже застарілі дані, вони не знали цього міста, не знали цих людей, не знали Україну. Давайте порціями, я далі буду.
Right, so from the very, very first days, they started persecuting the activists. And again, I'll make a small side note. There was some news from like New York Times that actually they have the lists of the people that they want destroyed, like they want killed, even before the invasion. Like we got that news. It was kind of wild thing to think about. But apparently that looks like it's a fact, to be honest. So they started very directed persecution of activists, but it's normally would be journalists, people that work with international projects, maybe people who support Ukrainian identity in any way, and actually just really wide range of what you call activists, even people who are protecting animals would probably be in that list. So it would be probably the goal would be anyone who has any kind of social capital power in that society. They have to be
Yep.
And it has to be said that though, despite what I said, that it seems like they didn't have a very good up-to-date information about Ukraine and about people. It seemed like there weren't too many, you could say, informants, collaborators inside of the country. So it seems that they had really old information and they didn't really know where to go and what to look for.
Я продовжу тоді ще трошки про активістів. І на початку вони шукали ветеранів війни, і друге, вони стикнулися з тим, що практично у всіх населених пунктах, навіть в маленьких селах, відбувалися акції протесту. Росіяни не вірять, що ці акції протесту відбуваються методом самоорганізації. Вони шукали, хто платить гроші, і хто організовує, хто збирає людей, хто дає команду. Вони не розуміють, що українське суспільство побудовано на горизонтальних засадах, що ми домовляємося з незнайомими людьми, що у нас соціальний капітал у вимірі довіри дуже сильний. І ми можемо самоорганізовуватися. І були масові затримання випадкових людей, яких довго били, щоб вияснити, хто організовує акції протесту.
Yeah, one very important part, actually, we saw a lot of videos. I don't know if you've seen, because I even posted on my page, but there were a lot of news that there are a lot of protests in cities and villages there. One thing I didn't notice, I had to mention that actually the first people that they were taken and persecuting were the ex-military. Because we had the war for 8 years, so we have pretty many ex-military people already. But yeah, I'll come back to the topic of the protests. So there were a lot of protests, which is quite crazy. There's crazy videos of people just going with flags and there are military around them because you are in an occupied city, but you still decide to have a peaceful protest. And the thing is that Russians, they didn't believe that those protests were actually self-organized. In Ukraine, it's very easy to have a self-organized protest. We're pretty good at that. Because the level of this kind of trust and communication and horizontal organization is very high. So even what I told you about volunteers before, it's kind of a similar idea because people are basically trusting other strangers, giving them money to buy something for the military, who also like, they don't know those military, it's all very horizontal. So I would say, I mean, I'm probably overestimating, but I think a large part of why Ukraine is doing pretty good so far is because of this horizontal connection between people. So even like maybe the hierarchy is not working very fine in terms of somebody on the top might not be ruling very well in that way, but in Ukraine we tend to compensate in terms of like, I know someone that can help you, that can help you, that can help you. And that works really well. But it seems like for Russians, they don't really believe that it's possible. So they would always think that those protests were paid by money by someone centralized. So they would actually just capture some people from those protests and beat them very hard and torture them to find out who paid you.
Right.
Yeah, and well, nobody did.
I see. Actually, that's a good segue to our next question, which is, to the extent that a lot of these activities are very, very decentralized, when people feel like they're in danger, can they try to leave the occupied territory, or what do they need to do to leave safely?
Sergey, did you want to add something to the previous one? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
Оксано, я щось не все зрозумів цей раз.
Вони перейшли до наступного запитання, і я хотіла сказати, чому.
Так. І я хотів би 2 слова додати до попереднього, буквально декілька ремарок. Зараз я бачу, як вони починають хапати вчителів, директорів шкіл, їх затримують, їм потрібно створити видимість існування соціальних організацій для опанування території. Для цього вчителі є вкрай важливими. І ми бачимо вже, що затримують діячів мистецтва, когось з мистецької сфери, але пов'язаних з інституціями. Тобто вони шукають людей, які би допомагали їм легітимізовувати. Вони б'ють, залякують для того, щоб ці люди потім записували, на яких розказували, або свою соціальну діяльність в суспільстві.
Класне ці відео.
Так,
вдається,
але треба колишнього голову Херсон Пилаєнка. І навіть під ОДА на камеру відмовилися від співпраці. І таких випадків багато. І тому так мало відео з прославлянням виходить, тому що більшість, не дивлячись на це все, відмовляється.
Okay. Yeah. So right now, actually, it's a little bit different stage in terms of persecution. So they are really pressured to create a sort of kind of the look of the working country there. So they are actually looking for people that can help them to legitimize their occupation. So, for example, they are really persecuting, taking in teachers, heads of the school, any social organizations, leaders, maybe some artists, especially the ones that are affiliated with organizations. And basically what they do is they try to scare them into supporting the Russian occupation by, for example, making a video where they say, I support, this is all good, blah, blah, blah. Or by just stopping and ceasing all the activity if they cannot reach their first goal. But even with that, it has to be said that actually not many people are being broken like that. We don't see many videos coming out of that. although there have been instances. So even, for example, the previous government, so the ex-city mayor was like really brutally tortured, but on the camera he still came up and said, like, no, this is Ukraine. So yeah, you see a lot of like daily life heroism going on.
Sure.
Ну, тоді я до наступного питання, чи можуть виїхати. Ну, дивіться, сьогодні прийшла страшна новина. На виїзді з Херсонщини на Дніпровщину, там Кам'яний Брід, стояла на останньому блокпосту 100 машин на виїзд. Давидів Брід, вибачте. І сьогодні вони були обстріляні з градів, з систем залпового вогню російських. І ми маємо страшні цифри, там десятки машин побитих, мінімум 3 вбитих і дуже багато поранених. І це до питання, чи можна виїхати. Так, час від часу можна. Вчора був вбитий директор автосалону «Вольво», який з своєю родиною, він там один чоловік, був всі інші жінки, діти і старші люди, пенсіонери. Їхню машину розстріляли просто. Сьогодні обстріляли з градів колонну, яка виїжджала з Херсонщини на вільні землі. І таких обстрілів небагато, але от як вони відбуваються? Перед цим мої знайомі виїжджали 4 доби, вони жили їх не пропускали. Для того, щоб доїхати до останнього блокпосту, вони проходили 10 блокпостів, 20, через кожний їх може бути кілометр блокпост. Часто там стоять люди, яким треба давати хабаря. Ставлення дуже різне на різних блокпостах. Деякі швидко проходяться, деякі ні. Перевіряють телефони, перевіряють татуювання, перевіряють машини, крадуть речі, забирають, вимагають цигарки, наркотики, алкоголь. І люди можуть по 4 доби ночувати в полі без води, з дітьми, на фермах, в сусідніх селах проситися. І от такі розстрілюють колони. Оксана.
Okay, so yeah, coming to our next question about belief. Actually, one very sad news came in recently, I think yesterday, that on one of the blog posts, there was a long line of around 100 cars trying to leave the region. I think it was Давидівка, a blog post. And
Давидів Брід.
Давидів Брід, yeah, it's a different name. Right? And they were just, я не знаю, як сказати град англійською.
Там є англійська, це MN. Окей, я подивлюсь, як система залпового вогню це називається, щоб не казати град.
Basically, like heavy artillery was basically shot all that column of the cars.
Oh my God.
So plenty of casualties, obviously. And yeah, it's just so bizarre. Like those in this war, we have like very barbaric usage of those artilleries. Not that I say that need to be used at all, but the fact that they are shooting like civilian people out of things that are created to, I don't know, shoot bunkers or something. So it's just bizarre that you shoot cars out of those things. They're like heavy, huge things.
Right. It's not for military purpose.
Multiple rocket launcher.
Oh my God.
Yeah, multiple rocket launchers.
Multiple launcher rocket system.
We have it a lot actually in this war, that just like civilian village houses are being shot out of those, which is so out of this world. It's just so crazy. And so another time there was director of the Volvo auto salon just being shot. He was driving with his family in the car and everyone just got shot. There was children and his parents. He was the only man, so usually would say, okay, a man, they're really being suspective, you know, difficult for men actually to move around. But he was just one, and the rest were just other members of the family. So there are cases like that. Obviously, not every car that leaves is being shot, but other than that, it still can be very unpredictable and very difficult. So actually, Sergei's friends, they were trying to leave, and they spent 4 days. And Ukraine is not that big. It doesn't take 4 days to leave that place. It would take probably normally on a normal situation, probably take a couple of hours. And because there are so many blog posts everywhere, it could be like every kilometer one, and each blog post would have a different attitude as well. You never know what they will want from you. They will check sometimes they check the body for the tattoos. It's a big thing, because apparently they believe that there are some nationalists among Ukrainians and they have special tattoos. And they check they check the phones, so you have to delete any kind of conversation that might implicate you, or all the pictures that you have taken. That is why actually, for example, we don't have many pictures from Mariupol coming out recently. Like after maybe like first half of the March, because it became a lot more difficult to take them out. You have to clear completely your phone if you want to pass the post and not be shot. Sometimes they want to bribe. Yeah, it's just very different. It's just very difficult. And if you travel for 4 days, obviously you have to sleep somewhere. So the whole family with children, without food, without anything, sleep in the field.
Without water.
Yeah, and no water. So yeah, it's quite difficult, very unpredictable. You might get shot, you might get out, but you don't know.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, no, it's heart-wrenching to hear all these stories, and I think you alluded to it earlier about food and sort of food security. So what's going on with the food, because Ukraine is very important to the world in terms of food supply.
Так. Україна п'ята, чи в минулому році, здається, була п'ятим в світі виробником зерна і дуже важливим, там третім, здається, експортером зерна, і багато країн Північної Африки, Близького Сходу, Африки критично залежні від українського зерна. З перших днів почали грабувати елеватори, вивозити зерно спочатку з Генічеського району, потім з інших. Зараз, за офіційними даними, вкрадено росіянами близько 400 тисяч тонн. Я думаю, що ці дані не повні, бо з якогось моменту стало важко вести облік викраденого зерна. Мої знайомі розповідали, що хлопці в їхньому селі, знаючи, що зерно крадуть, за українською охороняли елеватор, і коли вони почали вивозити зерно, вони знімали це на телефони, на смартфони. Їх просто вбили двох одразу, без розмов. Давай.
Yeah, so I'll start translating. Yeah, it's very hard, to be honest. All the stories very hard to translate as well. So I mean, to begin with, like very general kind of information. So Ukraine is 5th in the world in terms of export of food, and a lot of countries in Middle East and Africa, especially, so that is why, yeah, it's quite difficult in terms of what's going to happen to them later this year, for example, since Ukraine cannot really produce as much wheat, with half our territory being taken. Well, not half, okay. Sorry, I'm being dramatic here. I'm really sorry. It's not up to Sergei. Sergei is very, very precise in what he says, very professional. I'm not so much. I'm just being emotional.
Understand.
Yeah, so yeah.
Ви також.
Any mistakes is mine.
Ви також дуже точно все.
So anyway, at the first, like in the first day, the wheat has been taken by the occupiers from the storages en masse. So the estimation was that it's about 400,000 tons of wheat being taken, but it's very difficult to actually keep track of those things, obviously. So there is this heartbreaking story, and I heard it before, but so that the people kind of knew that it's already happening, and some young men in the village, they tried to protect the wheat. They tried to like stand around this wheat storage and kind of make sure nothing happens to it, or at least to keep track of what happens to it. And when the Russians started like taking the wheat away, they were just trying to make a video on the phone, and they just got shot right there. No conversation, nothing. Yeah. So yes, it's such a heartbreaking story. I don't know.
І у багатьох моїх знайомих фермерів вони просто приїжджають і крадуть техніку, пальне, матеріали, зерно, будь-що, що можуть вкрасти. Я знаю фірми, в яких виривали навіть, демонтували стаціонарне обладнання. Знаєте, у них можуть бути там якісь механізми, які там мають фундамент. Демонтували зрошувальні установки. Причому, якщо зерно вивозять, умовно кажучи, великими партіями генерали, то дрібніші підрозділи грабують менших фермерів. До одного не мого знайомого, а знайомих моїх знайомих просто приїхало 10 озброєних росіян, побили його і дружину, і забрали машини, і все, що було, пограбували будинок. Після цього він позичив машину і виїхав на Запоріжжя. Деяких фермерів тижнями тримають і катують, сильно б'ють, випитуючи, де в них гроші. Для того, щоб, вони знають, що гроші можуть бути на рахунку, для того, щоб отримати викуп.
І щоб отримати що?
Викуп.
Викуп, okay. Yeah, so the situation with farmers, so essentially there's a lot of looting going on, and they're taking pretty much everything. In modern farming, they use these big, expensive machines. So they're taking the machines, they're taking the fuel for machines, they're taking the materials. So, and it depends like on the level. So maybe like high-level generals would be large-scale looting, and then like low-level generals would be low-scale looting. So in terms of the wheat, that would be like more of a government-level organization of that. But even like smaller farmers, they've been looted on a smaller scale, just by local military people. So it becomes really bizarre. They took like irrigation systems, which is what we're doing them. So, for example, somebody that Serge is referring to, so just 10 people showed up, 10 military showed up at his house and picked him up, took everything that was remotely
usable
money from the house. He was also a farmer, and left. And after that, he took a decision and he managed to leave the region. Obviously, because he didn't have, what he had to protect in a way.
Sure.
He didn't have a reason to stay. And actually, some kidnappings are going on. So. They're kidnapping farmers because they know that they have money. They're trying to get their ransom. So they understand that the money probably are not in cash at home. They're probably on an account in a bank. So to get hold of those, they would take people hostage and ask for ransoms.
Oh my God.
That's very sad. Very sad. I heard from a commentator before that modern militaries just do not loot, but apparently the Russian military is nothing close to modern. It's terrible.
It's been a lot of looting in the north. It's very heartbreaking. And here it's because just that region is so farming oriented. That's where they are mostly focusing on.
I would imagine that, action, reaction, right? More looting, more resistance. So you touch on the resistance nature being very decentralized, and there's a lot of trust among and between the Ukrainians in the occupied territory. Can you share with us, kind of give us more context in terms of what the resistance movement looks like in the occupied territory? And you also said that there are very few collaborators, and just for our information, who are they and what are they doing, or are they being put up by the Russian government just to sort of try to put some sort of order in the occupied territory? Mm-hmm. So two parts, resistance and collaborators. Thank you.
Тільки одна репліка до попереднього питання. Деяким фермерам запропонували провести посівну, але з умовою, що 70% врожаю вони віддадуть росіянам, а тільки 30% залишать собі.
Як посівна буде?
Зараз.
Okay, I'll start translating. I'll just try to learn it. So, some farmers got this offer from the occupiers that they can start, growing their crops.
Почати сільськогосподарські роботи з тим, щоб 70% врожаю.
So, I mean, we have this word in Ukrainian, so I'm struggling to translate. That's just because it's such a big part of life that that's this action of putting the seeds in the ground so that they grow. And you have a specific time of the year for that. So maybe yes. It's English word as well, but I don't. So it actually is that it just, I think it's finishing right now, that period of time. So some of the farmers, they got an offer that they can start doing that if they want, but they have to give 70% of the profits to the Russians.
70? That's terrible.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's terrible. That's looting.
I wonder, maybe that would make sense, like if you think, oh, but maybe by the autumn they won't be around, so we don't have to give them anything.
Right.
But that's my thinking right now.
Right.
You were going to say something, sir, as well.
Так, тепер про колаборантів, collaboration.
Moving on to the next question. Okay.
Так. Рух опору почав відбуватися з першого дня. Була територіальна оборона, яка дуже сильно постраждала, дуже багато вбитих було в Херсоні. Але вона була придушена збройним чином. Одразу почався мирний протест. І особливістю його стало те, що до політичного протесту приєдналися ті категорії громадян, які ніколи не брали участь у політичному чи соціальному житті. Це дрібні підприємці, фермери, педагоги, люди з мистецтва, бюджетники. Вони ніколи не проявляли своєї соціальної і політичної активності. Це зовсім нове обличчя протесту. 8 років пройшли недаремно. Потім місцеве самоврядування після децентралізації. Ці обрані мери і депутати місцеві. Країна дуже сильно змінилася за ці 8 років, і вона відчула себе по-іншому. Дуже сильно звучали слова, які я бачив на відео з цих протестів. Ми маємо право, ми на своїй землі. Оце відчуття права, воно таки спрацювало. Давайте по черзі потім далі.
Yes, so the first part of the question. So resistance did start from the first day, and in Ukraine we have this military unit that is organized, that is like the lowest level of training, because ordinary people can just join it. Territorial defense unit. So those were also trying to resist, but they were overwhelmed by the proper military of the Russian. they couldn't do much. What really happened, which is important and very interesting, is a peaceful protest that I have mentioned before. And the interesting part about it, the people that never joined the protests actually did join this one. So normally people who are quite, I think, don't have a lot of activism in their life, like small government officials, farmers, teachers, small businessmen, they all joined the protest. And in a way, like I have to remind that Sergei, he is deputy director of an organization that I mentioned before in the bio that actually promotes the building of local communities and local governments. So in this point, he just mentioned that, yeah, like all the work that we did pay off in the last 8 years. Because people, they are being very proud owners of their land in a way. So the words that they're saying, like, we have the right, it's our land, you know, we stand here. So all this like idea of self-organization and having like the local government is being played out quite powerfully in the occupation, because people really feel connection to their government and their land, and that, you know, we stand here.
Мого знайомого журналіста схопили, били тиждень і потім привезли з Каховки, привезли в Херсон і били, допитували, били в будинку обласної державної адміністрації. Це відбувалося тоді, коли на вулиці йшов мітинг. І вже стало, ну, така тепла погода, і співробітник ФСБ відкрив вікно, щоб свіже повітря. І мій знайомий, якого допитують, розповідає, що в цей час площа крикнула «Слава Україні!» Херсон – це Україна. І ФСБшник збентежено і так трошки з розпачем: ми прийшли їх освобождати, я не розумію. Тобто для них це шок оцей. Оці суспільні настрої, да? Протестні.
Ця історія, вона десь на початку була, я так розумію. Вони, напевно, вже зрозуміли, що відбувається.
Так. Це на самому початку. Коли ще відбувалися мітинги.
Так. So yeah, just like a story, another story in the same line about the protests. So actually, the friend of Sergei was taken at the beginning of everything happening, was taken to, how do you call this? Like, well, local secret police.
Secret police, yes.
Yeah, FSB. KGB.
KGB, yeah, the new KGB.
Yes.
Yeah.
KGB.
And he was being beaten up and tortured, and at some point, the window, it was quite warm weather, so the guy who was torturing him, he opened the window. And at that point, there was this, what I told you before, Slava Ukraini, from the protesters outside, kind of ended up in the room. And the guy was kind of sad, the torture guy, because he was like, oh, like, we came here to save you and to free you from oppression. Like the level to which, at the beginning, of course, now I think they have a pretty good idea of what's happening, but at the beginning, the level to which Russian people, like Russian military, Russian people, Russian society were completely oblivious to the moves, to the to what is happening in Ukraine, to what kind of, they really thought that the Ukrainians gonna greet them with flowers, you know.
Yeah, they're being liberated.
Right.
Yeah, from what, but
Right. That's clearly wrong.
І цей спротив, він дуже вплинув на колаборацію. Колабораціоністів дуже мало. З декількох причин.
So yeah, this kind of protests that really influence level of collaboration with, because basically there are not enough collaborators. There are very little collaborators.
Так. І тут декілька причин, чому мало. По-перше, тиск суспільної думки не впливає. По-друге, більшість херсонців або мешканців області або персонально стикалися, або мають знайомих, які стикалися з брутальною або злочинною поведінкою росіян. І по-третє, фронт близько, і особливо на лівому березі, в самому Херсоні постійно чують, як працює українська артилерія. І час від часу діють озброєні партизани в самому Херсоні, і окремі колаборанти або зникають, або бувають вбитими.
Right. So the collaboration, in terms of collaboration, it's not going really well for Russian occupiers. There are not many people doing that. There's three main reasons. The first one is public opinion is not on their side. Secondly, pretty much everyone has somebody who faced the brutality and violence of the Russian occupiers, so wouldn't want to collaborate on that. And also I think quite important that actually the line of the fighting, I don't know how to say, the front line, is quite close. So even in the Kherson, the main big city, you can hear Ukrainian artillery working from time to time. So, well, Sergei didn't say that, but I would say maybe it's because they feel that, okay, actually Ukraine is quite close. Maybe they come here soon. So we don't need to go to that extent to collaboration. There are actually military partisan movement inside, and occasionally collaborators are disappearing.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. So again, I really want to thank Sergei and Oksana for sharing all these stories. And I'd like to ask maybe the final question for today's show. On the news, there's been talk about annexation, talking about some kind of referendum for parts of Ukraine to join Russia. So any thoughts about that? And I'm also very curious, like if it becomes, if it happens, if it becomes part of Russia, would you get drafted into the Russian army?
Ну, це саме цей спротив, тихий, активний, пасивний, боротьба за символічний простір. Зараз ще Херсон описують гаслами, клеють листівки з погрозами росіянам. Він зробив і відсутність колаборантів, зробили проведення референдуму неможливим. Не можна провести референдум, навіть фейковий, чисто для картинки, якщо ти не можеш зібрати хоч когось з місцевого самоврядування. Не можеш показати комісію, навіть якщо ти привезеш з Криму якихось людей для масовки, як вони робили на 9 травня або на інші дні, тобі все рівно треба показати хоч щось. Бо Росія – це пропагандистська імперія. Для пропаганди треба картинка. Одного разу вони знімали сюжет про Херсон в російському місті Єйськ, наприклад. Настільки у них все погано на Херсонщині. Зараз буде трошки краще, вони будуть трошки більше сюжетів знімати. Але тим не менше, оскільки вони заходили в Херсон і в Україну взагалі, очікуючи, що їх будуть зустрічати з квітами, вони не були готові до опору. І з самого початку не розраховували на референдуми, на створення Херсонських народних республік. Вони розраховували захопити всю Україну. По ходу, коли це в них не вийшло, Київ встояв, уряд не втік, українці б'ються і успішно б'ються, вони почали вигадувати далі інші сценарії. Оксано, давайте, щоб не все одразу.
Окей, one of our friends left us.
Continue, please.
It was too long. Okay, yeah, sure. So, well, about annexation. So, because of that kind of sense of lack of collaboration with occupiers in the region, they can't really hold a referendum like they did in Crimea before, for example, to say that, okay, it's an independent country now, and now we want to join Russia. So yeah, because even if you want to make it fake referendum, you still need a number of people for that, a number of people participate in that, and they cannot get even this. So for example, for some events, they actually brought people from Crimea, but it doesn't seem that there are enough for them to make a referendum as well. They're really struggling to like recruit people for their propaganda pictures. And even some of the TV news that they were showing from Kherson before, they were showing from one Russian town because they couldn't find proper pictures that they wanted. So yeah, it seems like they were not really ready for this kind of resistance and this kind of scenarios that played out. So they just tried to come up with different ideas, including this referendum idea, because they did it before in Crimea. And actually, I mean, it's a very old playbook. They did it in Finland in 1939.
Yes.
But yeah, it seems like everything's a little bit like improvisation. They're not ready for the people being fighting them.
Right. And then the danger of being drafted into Russian army if annexation happens.
Наскільки так що у них ці сценарії зірвалися, їх не було, вони не знають, що робити. Зараз, я думаю, вони збираються відкласти питання Херсону на півроку, з тим, щоб вони розраховують, що вони примусять Україну до нових переговорів типу Мінську-2, тепер буде там Стамбул чи Мінськ-3, і вже там по факту, значить, визначити лінію і тоді якось адміністративно оформлювати Херсонську область. Призивати в російську армію настільки нелояльне населення – це великий виклик. Вони дуже хочуть нових призивників, вони не хочуть воювати росіянами, вони хочуть воювати українцями. Але на зараз це виглядає як повна авантюра.
Yeah, right. So it seems like the question of annexation is not that easy for them to do at the moment because of so much of local resistance. So it seems like they want to hold this question maybe for half a year. And then maybe if we have some peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, and then maybe they can, kind of claim this territory. So it seems like there won't be annexation anytime soon, just because they cannot manage to do it in any, semi-legitimate way. In terms of drafting, so yeah, they very much like to draft people from occupied territories, like they did in around Donetsk and Lugansk. So they don't, of course, they don't want to fight with the Russian population. And here is also my side note, probably because they're afraid of the, a little bit of the Russian people unsatisfaction due to the fact. But as much as they want to do it, it's not. They cannot really draft such unloyal soldiers.
Right.
So yeah, there is that.
Right.
So that's why probably it's not going to happen.
Right. If you cannot trust your own soldiers, then that's an even bigger problem that you have to deal with. Right, understand. Well, I really thank you for sharing all this information. And as we talked about before, based out of Taiwan, we get a lot of news about Ukraine, but it's very different to hear sort of direct information. So I did say this is the last question, but actually I have one final last question, which is anything that you would like to talk to our audience that you think we can do in Asia, in Taiwan, to kind of support. I think there are some donation opportunities, websites that we can participate in. Do you want to talk about them a little bit, maybe?
Так, ну я хочу переказати всім вільним людям в країнах Азії, всім, для кого свобода і незалежність є цінністю, і сказати, що в новому світі люди, які мають гідність і цінують свободу, мають бути разом. Оксана?
Yeah, so, я навіть думаю, якби ви сказали це англійською, це було от прямо. Okay, so first of all, I don't know, it's such a good sentence in Ukrainian. Basically, sending greetings to all the free people of Asia.
Thank you.
And yeah, we have to stand together in all of this. Сергій?
Ну, я хочу сказати, що мої друзі, наприклад, мали давні контакти з тайванськими друзями, і вони їх підтримували. Мого друга, який 13 діб сидів в підвалі в Бучі, і потім чудом вижив і вивіз сім'ю. І якраз тайванські колеги йому навіть допомагали дібратися там до Західної України, коли він був в дуже важкому становищі. І Україна бачить, як тайванці ставляться, і як вони розуміють нашу ситуацію.
So yeah, it's very visible how Taiwan supports Ukraine, and not in terms of like big government support, but just privately. So actually, a friend of Sergei, he spent 13 days in the underground in north of Kiev. There used to be a very bad situation, if you remember. And actually, his Taiwanese friends were supporting him and were helping him to even get to the west of Ukraine when he was in a very, very bad situation.
Не дивлячись на те, що українська держава все-таки стала трошки більш інституційною, величезну роль в тому, що ми вистояли, відіграють наші волонтери дуже різних напрямків. Ми можемо сваритися один з одним, але дуже важливо підтримувати ці волонтерські проекти. Є такий «Повернись живим», наприклад, який збирає зараз рекордні суми. І я закликаю Save Life in UA сайт їхній для того, щоб допомагати Україні і стояти поруч.
Yeah, so in this war, actually, yeah, it's also very good sentence in Ukrainian. It's difficult. So in this war, our power is that we actually stay together in terms of our international collaborations and in terms of our internal collaborations. So the volunteers that I have mentioned is a very, very big part of this war. It has been for the last 8 years, and now it didn't stop. So that is why one of the volunteering organizations, actually it's the biggest one in Ukraine, is called Повернись живим in Ukrainian, or
come back alive. Yes.
Yes. So if you would like to support Ukrainian armies, that's probably Ukrainian army, but in general Ukrainian country, that's probably the best way at the moment.
Great. Thank you so very much. And yeah, thank you for sharing the information. And we will have the information on the episode note. And I would like to strongly suggest that, we do our part, everybody do our part for a better tomorrow. So thank you again for your time, and we'll the show coming here, and thank you again, Sergey, and thank you to you, Oksana.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
哇，真的非常感谢 Sergey， 然后也非常感谢 Oksana 跟我们分享这么多。其实真的很多这么细的事情，就是这种 将近是第一手，然后他们对于这个文化上的分析等等，不是像我这种就是电视上谁跟谁打，什么又要飞弹又要什么弹的那个，当然不是说那个不重要啦，只是我觉得真的有借这个机会了解到一些在一个战地，在被占领区，不管是怎么反抗还是不反抗的一些选择这样子。那大叔这样你觉得呢？
是，我觉得有一个点对我来讲就是印象很深刻，就是我们这几位乌克兰的朋友，他们都不约而同讲到说，他们组织自己的方式是一个比较去中心化，好像比较是没有一个上面谁讲什么，然后下面就跟着去做那种概念。那相对于俄罗斯，好像就是一个传统上，它就是因为过去70-80年的这个共产主义的影响，所以它就是一个比较上面一个指令，下面跟着做，就是一个所谓的中心化跟去中心化的两个阵营这样子。那我觉得这个点很有趣啦，就是说先不论是说哪一个比较优势或劣势，但是很明显这两边的阵营就是采取不一样的组织的一个架构。那这个策略到底谁会所谓的输赢，坦白讲现在还很难讲，但是就是看起来真的是两边都还是卯足全力在打这场战。
是，我觉得这个做这一系列节目对我来讲有一个很大的感觉，就是战地的事情真的不是今天状况怎么样跟明天是完全不相干的。
当然
所以好，那也非常感谢大家收听，因为这一集真的比较长，所以我们就少讲一点，还是非常我还是那句话，非常感谢我们在乌克兰的这些朋友跟我们分享他们在第一线上看到的东西，然后我们当然也是有很多其他相关的资讯，还是非常鼓励大家有兴趣上我们的这个谢伯伯时间的脸书粉专可以去参考。那如果大家有什么其他问题还是什么，我也非常欢迎大家跟我们的互动与讨论，甚至如果有什么问题我们都还认识所以我们可以去帮大家问。好，那在最后这边呢，我们下个礼拜也是一个非常有趣的，我们已经讲到战地，讲到第一线，所以呢，就我们找到一位朋友，他是退休的战地记者，我们请他来分享一下这个新闻战地记者的新闻到底怎么决定，怎么做这件事情，也非常期待。谢谢。
谢谢大家收听本集的谢伯伯时间。在本集节目结束前，要来好好感谢我们最棒的幕后团队，我是 Ariel， 还有 Oliver、Hannah 还有 Lalisa， 以及门面担当大叔嗓大叔甲。如果你喜欢我们的节目，别忘了按下订阅和5颗星的评论哦。另外也祝大家在疫情期间都能平安健康，那我们就下集见，拜拜。